Welcome to Capitalize Your Finances, the podcast that's your ultimate guide to mastering personal finances and unlocking the secrets of entrepreneurship. Each week, we dive into the world of personal finance and business development and have fascinating conversations with industry experts, seasoned entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who share their insights, strategies, and stories to help you get ahead in life. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur looking to scale your business or someone just starting out on your financial path, this podcast is your go-to resource for inspiration and actionable insights.
Welcome back to Capitalize Your Finances. As always, I am your host, Christopher A. Panayoti, the Cap and Capitalize in the Capitalize HQ podcast studio, and we have remotely calling in the one and only Shane Baldwin, the author of The Honest Lie. Shane, welcome to the show.
Chris, thanks for having me, man. I wish I could have made it out there to you, but I appreciate you zooming me in over video.
Absolutely. Well, you know, we have to pivot when desperate times call for desperate measures, and we made it work. And yes, we would love to have you in the studio at some point in time. But, you know, enough of that, because we got to get into your book, The Honest Lie, which I thought was fantastic. But before we get into The Honest Lie and dive into your book, I want you to give our capitalizers, our listeners, a little bit of a backstory into you and who you were, why you wrote the book, as you've had quite the rock star lifestyle. And so what was your life up until, not to spoil anything, you were incarcerated?
That's right. Yeah. So in college, I started a business called Clean Flicks. See, Mormons aren't supposed to watch rated R movies. But of course, Chris, you know what I wanted to do? I wanted to watch some rated R movies. So I found some editing software. We edited out the swearing, sex, and nudity, and then we rented these videos to all the Mormons in the land. I sold my interest in that business in 2004 and got offered an opportunity to be a stockbroker, financial advisor, financial planner, whatever you want to call it. They got a lot of names going on in that industry for the Wall Street firm Merrill Lynch. And my job at Merrill Lynch was just to go out and find money, convince people that wherever they had it to transfer it to Merrill Lynch. So my job consisted of at least 18 holes of golf a day, and 41 nights a year I was sitting on the front row seat at Utah Jazz games, taking people to NBA basketball games. So that was like my job from 2004 to 2007. And I worked with my father. My father ended up managing about $1.5 billion at Merrill Lynch. And I had what looked like a pretty amazing job. But I had a hard time fitting in that box at Merrill Lynch. I'm kind of an out-of-the-box guy. So in April of 2007, and the market was still up at that point. The real estate market was on fire. Stock market was up. And I went in and told my dad, I said, Dad, I'm going to start my own investment firm. I'm leaving you. And ultimately, I left. I started a company called Silverleaf. And initially, my plan was to buy land and develop that land. But by summer of 2007, after I had left Merrill Lynch in this amazing job, the market completely crashed. And I had to come up with a different business altogether, because the business that I intended to start through real estate and real estate development didn't exist. So, Chris, I don't know if you've ever read a newspaper cover to cover every day, but I grabbed the Wall Street Journal and I literally said, I'm going to find my next opportunity by reading the Wall Street Journal cover to cover every day. And that's what I did. And dude, reading a newspaper cover to cover doesn't seem like it would be that hard. It would take me several hours every day to read the whole newspaper. This was when we actually had hard copy newspapers. I know back in 2008. But while I was doing that, I read about a bank that had failed. And the thought came to me, and it was only the third bank to have failed. The thought came to me, I wonder what happens. If I had a car loan with that bank, what happens to my car loan? So I called the FDIC. And I asked them, and they said, hey, we package up those loans and we sell them. I said, you sell them to who? I said, to the private market, to investors. I said, at what price? I said, like a car loan? I don't know, 10 cents on the dollar. And I'm like, hold on. You're telling me if I had a $20,000 loan secured by a car, somebody's going to buy that for $2,000? I said, do you do that with real estate? They said, oh yeah. And that's when I knew I had my next opportunity. So in September 2008, I completed my first transaction. I bought a $5.1 million note for $800,000. It was secured by a brew pub in Chicago, the building. And I didn't have the $800,000, if I'm being totally honest. I had it under contract, and I started going out to investors to raise the $800,000. And one of the guys was like, "Hey, that's a pretty good deal. I think that building's probably at least worth $2.5 million." I said, "Yeah, you should invest." He said, "I don't really partner with anybody, but I'll buy it from you." I'm like, "Okay, for what would you buy it for?" He said, "I don't know, $1 million." I paid $800,000. I do the math. I'm like, 200. I make $200,000. Okay, so that's what I did. And over the course of the next 4.5, 5 months, I did that same type of transaction and generated about $5 million in cash, just what I call flipping debt. And then I would talk to these guys and they would tell me, "Oh, that was such an amazing deal. Thank you so much. Let me know if you have another one of those. I made all this money." And I thought, sounds like I need to own this. And that was a mistake. I'm really good at finding a deal and just flipping it. If you're going to ask me to find it, manage it, and figure it out, not my wheelhouse. But that's what I decided I was going to do. Anyways, we ended up buying $800 million worth of bad debt secured by real estate all over the country from 2008 to 2012. In 2012, the FBI came knocking at my door, and they were investigating me on securities fraud related charges. And as you know, you get into the securities world and man, you sneeze or fart the wrong way and it's securities fraud. And so they started diving into my stuff. We had some deals that had gone bad. And ultimately they offered me a deal to go to like a federal camp, super easy, 10 months probably. And I turned it down. And they held a grand jury and they decided not to indict me. And that was a big wake-up call for me. I mean, anytime you're looking at potentially going to prison, it kind of wakes you up. So I started this quest for purpose. I divested myself from all of my investments. I tried to do the best job I could to settle out with my investors. All the while I'm getting sued. It was a nightmare of a time period for me. But I just kind of started asking real questions like, who am I? Why am I here? Why do I have these different gifts and talents? And I really started focusing kind of on my spiritual self. I had been so focused on my financial self that I had kind of lost myself spiritually. And there's a phrase in the book of Revelations of all places. I think it's Revelations chapter 3, verse 12 or something like that. But the phrase is to go no more out. And I'm like, man, I don't know what that means, but I don't want to go out anymore. So I want to figure out why I came down here to this earth, and I want to make sure that I do the job that I was sent down here to do. By 2014, I was running out of money, and I got this magic trick, Chris. I can make $1 million in 60 days. And I'd done this a couple times prior. And sure enough, to make a long story short, I met a guy at the gym I worked out at. He had an asset that was worth, in my mind, about $3 million. He needed cash. I offered him $500,000. He accepted the deal. I gave him the $500,000, and then I sold that asset literally a month later for 1.5, and bam, I made $1 million. And I had never asked God what I should do with my money, but I knew that I had been a bad steward with money leading up to this point. So I prayed and said, "Hey man, what do you want me to do with this?" And I swear to you, I heard a voice, I don't know, inside of my head, outside of my head, say, "Shane, I want you to give it away to random people." So I took a map of Mississippi because I knew there were a lot of people in need in Mississippi. And I threw a dart at it, and it landed on Natchez, Mississippi, of all places. Right on the Mississippi River. I went out there dressed as an undercover door-to-door salesman. And my whole mission was to find people that were in need. And to be honest, it was one of the most spiritual experiences of my life. I would show up at somebody's door and find out she's got a daughter that is sick and she has $52,000 of past due medical bills, and I was there to take care of it for her. And so it was truly an amazing experience. Came home from that experience, went to God. I said, man, I did what you asked me to do, but I still don't know what my purpose is here. And man, if you need me to go live in a tent, I will go live in a tent. And what I learned from that, Chris, is be careful what you start asking God for, because he's like, oh, you want to live in a tent, do you? Oh, okay. Because about 4 months later, and this will take us to that point of the incarceration, I found myself in an 80-foot cell. It took me a minute, but I realized that was the tent God wanted me to live in.
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious, and there's a lot to unpack there too. So this is more surface level, but what were some of your wildest stories that you could remember from the wealthy lifestyle days, right? The Merrill Lynch, you're on you're on the court of every Jazz game. Like there had to be some crazy stories that stick out. You got like one or two?
Yeah, I mean, I belonged to a club, and Michael Jordan was a member of the club. And I'm literally playing in golf tournaments with Michael Jordan. I'm sitting down at tables eating with Michael Jordan. So, I mean, Michael Jordan's Michael Jordan. I mean, that was certainly amazing. The other thing is I learned some different like hacks of the wealthy, right? So listen, if you want to go to Vegas and you want to have an amazing time at Vegas, this is all you got to do. Wire $1 million to wherever you want to go stay. I don't know, the Wynn, Caesars, whatever. Wire in $1 million like you're going to go gamble it. They will literally give you free rooms, free food, send a Rolls Royce to go pick you up. Like they'll roll out the red carpet for you. And maybe you go sit down and play blackjack, but not with $1 million, or you play 21, for a little while. And, man, you can get everything comped. And then when you leave, you just wire it back. So, you learn these kind of unique things as you start running around with people who have, serious net worth, and they figured out kind of all the wealthy hacks to this is why the rich get richer, because they don't have to pay for their suites and their cars and everything. They just send $1 million over and it's all paid for.
Well, and so when you were at Merrill, and you mentioned a little bit of what your life was like during that period of time, but, like take us through a day to day. I mean, were you literally on the golf course 5 days a week, and were you doing any advising, or were you just, I mean, literally out there shaking hands, kissing babies, and just revving the engine and burning the candle from both ends?
All I did, literally, I went to every charity function there was. I played golf, sometimes 36 holes a day. I would stack up tee times. I'd play in the morning with a foursome. And it was when you belong to Glenwild and Michael Jordan's a member there, and I could ask anybody. What's interesting is that super wealthy people, they still don't have access to everything. So if you have access to front row seats at Jazz games, even a wealthy person will go with you to that. If you have access to a Glenwild and they're not a member there, but they play golf, like they know exactly what you're saying, hey, come golf, and you know what I'm asking you for. I'm going to try to convince you to come do business with us. Sure. But I did no advising. Literally, I had my I had all of that, but I would literally go and meet all of the people. I would take them to my dad, who had 20 plus years experience, and I would set him down, and he would do the pitch and roll everything out. I was gone off to the next guy. And so my whole function, my whole job was dinners, events, golf, Jazz games, wherever the wealthy were hanging out. Like I was there. I was right in the mix. And I learned, some really interesting habits and things that the wealthy do. And I just considered myself like I was hunting assets under management. I mean, I was hunting, high net worth people. And so I learned what they like. I learned that even though they're wealthy, if you do simple things, like I meet somebody and they talk to me about their son who, I don't know, he's 12 years old and plays AAU basketball, and he's a huge Kobe Bryant fan. If I could get my hands on some Kobe Bryant memorabilia, and a week later I'm like, hey man, I was thinking about your son. I happen to have this signed autographed card or jersey of Kobe Bryant. Just wanted to give it to you. Man, as soon as I did something like that, it was like, okay, I want to do business with you. They didn't know. And the truth is, people aren't buying, in my opinion, in your space, the best asset manager on the planet. Like everybody's going to say that they're the best asset manager on the planet. And you certainly have to do the right thing. And you certainly have to be somewhat good. But they're looking for more of a relationship person, more of somebody that cares about them, that understands them, that's going to be there for them. You can find financial advisors, they're a dime a dozen. But if you can find somebody who actually like cares about the person and gets involved in their lives, then you got a client for life.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that too, because like I didn't work at Merrill, but I worked at the other two big firms, and that lifestyle was actually what turned me off about it. Because for me, by no means am I considering myself a Warren Buffett type, but just a simplistic lifestyle, like the whining and diet. I've always used it as the analogy of I don't get taken to dinner by my gastroenterologist every time I have a colonoscopy, So like
Totally.
I would much rather just reinvest into myself, which in turn reinvest into the people. I will say it's interesting because when I came into the industry, and just a quick side note, because I want to get back to you, but that's when the whole stockbroking world was kind of dying out. I mean, they're still around, but they're not as common.
True.
And then financial advising was taking off. Financial planning was around, but it wasn't this super popular concept. And now you fast forward today. This may be a little bit bold of saying on the show, but I think financial advisors are going to be pretty much done here within the next 5 years because you can Google it.
Yeah.
But financial planning it's going to be invaluable.
Totally.
And we've talked about this.
Yeah, the
ton.
landscape has totally changed because now it's
Totally
about
changed.
having a plan. It's about setting up your estate. It's about, looking out 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And back in my day, it was heavy on the transaction side. Like, how can we transact? Yeah. And how can we get paid commissions? Those are the early 2000s, and it's just evolved and it's changed the whole landscape of that industry and business.
Yeah, it's totally different. Well, and I wanted actually to go back to Silverleaf a little bit. So, and you were stating that you were making, not all the time, but in some cases, over $1 million, but your ego was compounding at the same rate. Now, I don't know if that's a direct quote, but it was pretty close.
Yeah, I look at pictures of myself at that time, and I'm just like, oh, that guy, he's such an idiot. He's so clueless as to what he's even doing. Now, you got to understand, I'm like 28 years old. I'm 29 years old, and I just didn't understand what I was doing. And if I would have been smarter, if I would have been more humble, if I would have been more meek, if I would have had some of these attributes, it happened to me way too quick. I didn't have enough life experience. And then I was being called the golden boy, the guy who's got the Midas touch. So then you start believing that it doesn't matter what you do, it's going to work. So you throw out the window all of the things that you were doing that were working, and you just say, it doesn't matter, everything's going to work. And then it doesn't.
Yeah. Well, and that's a saying that I've fallen to heavily, in the fact that I tell people all the time, if success happens very quickly, it can be gone just as fast. But if it takes forever to come to you, it is going to take forever to lose it. In most cases, if you do it the right way, it won't go away. But did you ever have that moment? Because it's almost hard for me to believe, and I'm not saying I don't believe you, but it's hard for me to believe in your situation there wasn't that moment where you go, I should probably be more prudent with this money. Did that moment really happen after all of the facts when you were in your jail cell? Like, man, I should have done XYZ differently? Or did you have moments along the way and you're just like, I'm just going to ignore that?
Yeah, well, when it's coming so easy and you have so many deals, and then you're basically taking your money and you're just parlaying it into the next deal, the next deal, the next deal, the next deal, you actually think you are being prudent because you're just reinvesting back into these similar assets. And then you end up with, like, the deal that just wrecked me was a $75 million loan that was secured by a condotel in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. Beautiful property. You look at this property, it's called Trailhead Lodge. You Google it, like, it's masterful. It's beautiful. And I get it for 25 million. So I'm like, that's a deal. Well, it wasn't a deal because nobody in 2011 wanted to own a second, third, fourth home that's a condotel in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. So even though I bought it at a deal that the price per square foot was a deal, if nobody's willing to buy those things, then it's not a deal. And I capitalized it completely wrong. I had high interest debt. I had short-term money. And so on top of that, I compounded this issue, and I put a bunch of money into that one deal. And it just turned out to be a nightmare. If I would have capitalized it and said, okay, we're going to hold this thing. I mean, today it's worth over $100 million. So obviously, if I would have held it and been smart and capitalized it the right way, I would have been gold. But I was capitalizing things the wrong way. And so you can actually buy something that is a deal, but if you capitalize it the wrong way, then it's all of a sudden it's not a deal. And so how you capitalize something is almost just as important as the asset you're buying.
I can say with confidence in more ways than one, I know exactly what you're talking about.
I know.
Now, I wanted to ask, before we dive headfirst into your book, explain to our listeners the concept of the honest lie. What is the honest lie?
Okay, so in Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, this is where I first came across this concept. He calls it autosuggestion. Then you fast forward into the Brian Tracy era, and you get the word positive affirmation. Fast forward again, and you're going to get into Tony Robbins' world, and he's going to call them incantations. And then you fast forward into my world, and I refer to them as honest lies. An honest lie is something that isn't true about you today, but you want to be true about you in the future. So if I want to be a millionaire, I would say, and I'm not today, I would say I am a millionaire. And I would believe I'm a millionaire before I ever became a millionaire. And so most people don't believe they are something, and so they never become that something. You have to believe you are that thing in order to become that thing, because you have to plant that thing in your mind. And that's the honest lie.
Yeah. And so regarding your honest lie, it's like the classic fake it till you make it type of deal.
Yes.
Or similar. So, now that you've explained that, I've been curious to ask you, what would you say have been some of the largest honest lies you've given yourself regarding your personal finances? And have you thought about how you're going to make those honest lies a reality?
Yeah, I think for me, it's the honest lie that I am a great steward with my money. I never said that before. So what that tells me is when I go make financial decisions today, I remember that honest lie. Hey, you are a great steward with your money. And so I make better decisions. I'm not making hasty decisions. I'm a little more methodical because I've been telling myself that that's who I am. One of the mistakes that I made is I literally believed that money grew on trees, and in some sense that it does, but sometimes that tree's not bearing fruit. And so you got to be prepared for the days when the money isn't growing on the tree. But I didn't understand that sometimes money is growing on the trees, and sometimes it's the fruit's falling off and it's got to replenish itself. And you got to be able to withstand that time period, right? So you can say the wrong kind of honest lies too if you don't understand like reality. It's important to understand reality, especially if you're an entrepreneur. Sometimes there's going to be lots of money on that tree, and sometimes there's not going to be a whole lot of money on that tree, and you've got to make sure that you're prepared for those times.
I remember a long time ago, I was reading an article, and I forget where this article even was, which is weird because normally I remember this stuff. And the article talked about two types of people when it comes to wealth. There are income sheet wealthy people and balance sheet wealthy people. And so income sheet is what you were just saying, right? As the money's coming in, you're super wealthy. The money turns off, you're screwed. Balance sheet is what you're truly worth. And I think that's something that a lot of people misunderstand until it's too late. So I'm glad you caught that. And, I actually wanted to talk about your father a little bit because he told you this quote over the years: if you're honest, you have nothing to hide. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. So was there a moment that you remember before you went to prison that altered what he had said to you all those years? I mean, do you remember the first lie that started the road to incarceration?
Yeah. So for me, I had to dig so deep and say, why would I lie? I had to go back to my birth. So I was adopted as a baby, and deeply rooted somehow in my subconscious, I felt for whatever reason that I wasn't wanted, that I wasn't loved, or that I wasn't good enough. And so throughout my time, let's say I'm dealing with an investor, I had that deeply rooted in me, and I'm afraid that if I tell them the truth about this, then they're not going to like me, they're not going to want me, they're not going to love me. And so I make something up. And I go, I got a 50% chance that they'll never find out about this. And in the other 50% chance that they do, I'll just double down on that lie. And that's not the right way to look at things. If I would have just said, I'm going to be transparent. And I say this in my book, transparency is a superpower. As these deals were going bad, and I knew they were going bad, if I would have just gone to the investors and said, guys, I thought this was going to be way better than it was. I'm in trouble. I capitalized this different than I had told you I was going to capitalize it. And we're in trouble, and there's a chance that we're going to lose our entire investment here. These smart guys that had invested with me that were also very wealthy, I could have used their resources, their minds, to come up with a strategy to restructure. They would have been disappointed with me. They would have been mad at me even, but they were even more disappointed. They were even more mad because I let it get to the point to where we lost all of the money anyways. So I think it was the worry or the fear that I would somehow disappoint them that caused me to lie. And what we have to understand is that you're going to disappoint them even more by lying. Yeah, it might be, you might buy yourself a little time before they're disappointed, but it's much easier to manage a problem before it gets worse. They say mold grows in the dark. So if you're seeing mold, first thing you got to do is shed some light on it, and the light is the truth, so that you can, manage the mold problem before it becomes unmanageable.
Yeah, I like that. Well, and you mentioned this earlier that there have been a few times in your life where you've made $1 million in 60 days, which is mind blowing. And I want you to explain to our audience how you've gone about that. I know you mentioned one earlier when you were in the gym and there was a guy who had that asset that you turned, but explain how you've gone about it and lay out the rules that you've set for yourself, as it could be extremely valuable for our entrepreneurial listeners.
Number one, see what I have in my hand? This is a number 2 pencil. I know this is a relic in today's day and age because we're using technology. But what I do is I take my number 2 pencil and I write down my intention to make $1 million in 60 days. Now you would ask, Shane, why would you use a pencil? Well, this pencil, it used to be a tree. And that tree is a living, breathing thing that I think this guy God made. And it's intelligent. It has intelligence. And it's so happy. This pencil's so happy right now. It's happy to be in my hands because right now it's fulfilling the final measure of its creation, because once I sharpen this thing, it's going to end up totally gone. So you first write it down. Be specific. Now, the second thing you must do is, now the universe knows what your intentions are, that you intend to make $1 million in 60 days, and you write out how you intend to do that. That doesn't mean that that's how it's going to happen, but this is your intention. Maybe it's I'm going to sell this thing, or maybe it's I'm going to do some real estate deals, or maybe it's I'm going to whatever you can do inside of 60 days, you're going to write it down, and you have to believe that it's a possibility. Now, the next thing you have to do is you have to talk to everybody that comes into your path. If you get a DM, you respond to it. If you're at the gym and you feel prompted to go talk to that person, you go talk to that person. If you're in the grocery store, you've got to check in with every single person, and you got to see if they got your $1 million. Now, the other thing that I do is I start going through my contacts, and I look at names. And if I feel prompted, they might have an opportunity for me, let me check in with this person and see what they got going on right now. Let me see if they got any real estate they're trying to sell. Let me see if they got any assets they're trying to move. And I just start pinging people. And I'm focused every day just on that. So my total focus is, how am I going to find my $1 million opportunity? And how am I going to do that in 60 days? Now, when I had Silverleaf, I had deal flow. So it was pretty easy because I'm seeing deals all the time. Finding the guy at the gym, that was kind of a fluke. And then I just shot a TV show called Million and 60. And I go out there and I had a business that was a sales organization. And this was just, I thought I would sell. I'm like, okay, if I move 1,000 units, that's $1 million. So that's what I was going to do, is I was going to move 1,000 units. Well, I go out there and my partners didn't like some of the things that I was saying on my program. They didn't like that I was talking about faith and God and all these things, whatever. And I said, well, sounds like you guys need to buy me out. And they're like, okay. So we negotiated a deal and bam, I got my $1 million again. So you never know how it's going to happen, but you have to believe that it's going to. And then you've got to take massive action. I mean, in my TV show, I literally moved out to Savannah, Georgia for 60 days. So you got to take massive action is a critical component to that. And then total focus every day on, I got to find my $1 million opportunity.
Capitalizers, this episode is sponsored by the best-selling book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. Regardless of where you're at in your financial life, whether you're just beginning to express interest and commitment to your personal finances, at the pinnacle of your career, winding down into retirement, or thinking about your legacy for future generations, this book walks you through every step of the way so you can succeed on your terms and with your own values and passions guiding you. After reading this book, you will officially have Christopher A. Panayotu, the Cap in Capitalize, in your back pocket, guiding you in detail through every step of the way so that you can take charge of your finances, not the other way around. Head on over to Amazon.com today and start capitalizing your finances to the fullest with this incredible book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to financial framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. And now, back to the episode.
Well, that's an interesting segue, because throughout your book and throughout your social media and your show, you've talked about fear and failure and how they go hand in hand. And in many ways, they're one and the same, as I was thinking about this. So with your life story, you've already been through so much. And I wanted to ask, what is your biggest fear that you have today in your professional life?
So my biggest fear is not taking that risk, is knowing, hey, I had this prompting to go and do this thing and then not doing it. Like, that's my biggest fear. And I use fear as, like, if I'm afraid to do something that isn't going to, like, cause me death, right? If I'm afraid to call somebody, if I'm afraid to talk to somebody, if I'm afraid to speak at some event, I know that I must do that. Like, that's the first, like, when I get that feeling of like, oh no, that's when I go, oh yes. So whenever you get that feeling of like being afraid, I don't know, like for me, I would always get nervous and I would get called on in class, you know? And when I got really nervous and then they called on me, I knew, okay, I must have the right answer, or because I'm feeling this way. And so I've turned that fear, or what we call anxiety, into something positive, not negative. When I get anxiety over something I know is good and going to help me grow, then I got to do it.
And I would actually argue, I agree with you, but I wouldn't necessarily call it like that fearful adrenaline or feel like fearful anxiety. I would call it positive adrenaline.
You got it.
Because if you're at if you're at a networking event and you are just starting, I mean, I remember this with my business. I went to all of these networking events all the time for years, and you just go up, and eventually that becomes kind of numb. But and if you've never started a business or you've never been in sales, you do not know what I'm talking about. But for those of you that do know what I'm talking about, you know that feeling when you're just starting out and you see that one person. You're not even trying to sell. You're trying to build your goodwill, your brand, your character, and you connect with them. You immediately become friends professionally. They give you your card. And then the bonus would be, man, I want to come talk to you because I don't even know what you do, but the goodwill that you provide and the character that you have, I want that in my life. And you compound that over time. I tell myself all the time, I don't have many regrets in life. The one that I do have is I wish I could have gone back to the first couple years in business because even though I was financially not doing great, some of those moments were the best moments of my life. I mean, that's where you plant so many seeds from a business standpoint in your career, in your character, and some of my best friends have come from that. So all I'm saying is I actually think it's more of a positive than a negative, but I get what you're saying on that.
Yeah, and we just got to gauge when we get that feeling, like as you call it, positive anxiety. You got to take action. Take action in the moment, and you'll be like amazed at what'll come out of your mouth. And that's what I realized. It's like, wow, it's like some superpower in me helped me just say this the right way or do this just the right way, even though I was what quote unquote we would call scared to go and do that. It came out really well.
Yeah. Because for me, when I think of like going back to grade school or high school or whatever, and the teacher calls on you and you have that feeling, that's the same feeling. But the difference was, well, I'm not going to speak for you, but like, I didn't want to be in that class. Like, no offense, Mr. Bierman, if you're watching, like, biology was not my thing. Chem was not my thing. So I'm like, one, I'm checked out. Two, I know I'm going to get maybe a C. And then three, there are other people that like this. So like, I just froze like Ricky Bobby. I don't know what to do with my hands.
Yeah.
It's the worst feeling in the world. I did though want to transition a little bit into your chapter, leading yourself to riches. I particularly enjoyed this one as you described money as being the root of all good. And as a quick tangent, a couple months ago, actually, we had the legendary investor Guy Spear on. He's one of my all-time favorite investors.
That's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. And he mentioned in his book, as well as the interview, that in a similar way, greed can be used for the greater good. And so, listeners at home, they need to snag your book and recognize that your quote is not what it appears at face value. There's a lot more to unpack in that chapter. But I wanted to discuss your relationship with money just a little bit more. So there's a huge difference between being able to make a lot of money and then being a steward of it. We've all established that during this episode. My question to you, though, is more vulnerable than that. So when did you recognize that you may in fact need help with the stewardship side of your family's hard-earned wealth? And how has your mindset changed regarding money now versus when you were working for your dad's firm?
Yeah, I would say after I gave away that money, that changed how I viewed money altogether. So it was at that time that I said, wow, I found real joy. I didn't find joy buying a Ferrari or buying the new Porsche. It was fleeting. It was like exhilarating out the gate, but then it's like it went away. But when you help somebody, and it can be small, it doesn't have to be paying off somebody's medical bills. It could be just buying somebody a cup of coffee as you're at Starbucks and you're buying for the person behind you. There's real joy that comes. And those are real riches that I found is when we just do something kind with the money that we've been entrusted with to help somebody out. And so when your mindset is, I want to go make a lot of money, because yes, I like nice things and that's okay. And I like to drive a Porsche and I like to have a nice home, but I also love to help people as part of that. So for me, I've taken, I do 13% because I like the number 13. Everything's backwards. 13 is oftentimes known as a negative number, but I would argue that it's the lucky 13, not the other way around.
Okay.
And I take 13% of the money that I make every single month, and I give to charities or individuals. And I find great joy, and I learned something about money. Money likes to move. The more you move money, the more it moves to you. So the more you look to do good with that money, the more the universe is like, I like this guy. Let me see if I can increase the money that he's got, because I'm confident he's going to do good with it. When I was making all that money, I was only worried about me. And that was part of the problem with real estate. When real estate was my sole business, I felt like I lost my soul. And so if real estate is your sole business, then make it part of your business to give some of that to those that are less fortunate, to those that are in need. And yes, you can donate to charities, but I find it so much more powerful when I just donate to the random human that comes into my path. You would be amazed how many people I try to do things for, whether they need it or not. And they're like, no, I'm good. And I've learned how to combat. I bet 90% of the people, especially here in Utah, if I'm in Georgia, 90% of the people in Georgia will let me go ahead and buy their whatever. But in Utah, in more of an affluent place, I try and, do something kind for somebody. They're like, no, you don't have to do that. And I say, hey, I got this program. I'm required every day to at least do this one time a day. And they're like, oh, you got a program? Sure, go ahead and do that for me. But it's my own program.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. I've been thinking about this as far as giving, and my wife and I are really big on giving back. And giving is an intriguing thing in the world of investing. And what I mean by that is, so Warren Buffett, and sometimes I'm like, gosh, here comes another Warren Buffett story. But this one is a lot more powerful, and I don't think people really understand the value of it. So back in the, I might misquote this, late 60s, early 70s, that's when Berkshire was really starting to cook. And that's when Warren Buffett was becoming who we know today as Warren Buffett. And there was a lot of criticism because, yes, he was giving away money at that point, but according to others, he wasn't giving away enough, which that's another rabbit hole. And so one of his sons, Howard, the farmer, pulls him aside and says, Dad, these people are just crucifying you, and the fact that you're not giving enough away, what's the deal? And Warren allegedly was very distraught, and he goes, I know, and I struggle with that. Now, the reason why he struggled with it was he wanted to give back. And you fast forward today, he's part of the Billionaire Pledge. He's going to give 99% of his worth away when he dies, blah, blah, blah. But back then, that was years ago, he goes, I know that if these communities and these nonprofits are patient, I can compound money better than them.
True.
But that's a really tough road to toe. And I'm not comparing myself to Warren Buffett, but admittedly, that's been something that I struggle with, because you see some of these nonprofits, just as an example, and they manage themselves as a nonprofit, and that's not a compliment. And I'm going, oh my gosh, if I just waited 5 years or 10 years, they would have X amount more, versus they're just kind of blown into the wind. So I guess my question is to you, going a little off script here, even though you weren't on my side of the aisle, so to speak, in planning, you were around it. So do you ever struggle with that concept?
Yeah, it's hard. So what I've just decided is most of my giving, I get no tax benefit for. And oftentimes when we're only giving for the tax benefit, that's your reward. And I'm looking for a reward that's greater than a tax benefit. And you don't get a tax benefit for buying somebody's cup of coffee or, helping a family that is in need and they don't have enough to buy Christmas. You don't get any tax benefits for that. But what I've found that if you do that, then what compounds is your income. And so on one hand, you can say, okay, I want the tax benefit, but what if I told you by doing this, your income doubles, triples? But it is also challenging because in your business, there are certain things from a planning standpoint that also make a ton of sense from a charitable standpoint. And so it is this balancing act to make sure that you're you're selecting charities. Like if I'm going to donate to a charity, I want to know that charity, 100% of my proceeds are going to the cause, not going to the payroll of the cause. So you take like the Huntsman Cancer Institute, 100% of their donations go to cancer research. And Huntsman himself, who's independently wealthy, or their family, covers the payroll expenses of the nonprofit. So I like to find nonprofits that have that as kind of their MO.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's interesting. And we give in more ways than one, whether it's the tax benefit or not. That's kind of beside the point. I will say this: if you haven't looked into, and my listeners have heard this before, but I'm just telling you as if they're not listening. Monish Pabrai, who is one of my favorite investors of all time, he founded the Dakshana Foundation in India, where they go and assist with kids that, and we talk about poverty in the United States. It's not even, there's no comparison. I think Monish said too, he's like, we're the only country where you can be impoverished and fat, And so in India, I mean, these kids have no chance. So the Dakshana Foundation gives them this opportunity, but it's fascinating because he still runs it not as for profit to make money, but for profit to make sure those results are coming in. And it's a fascinating foundation, and it's helped me kind of frame my mentality around giving. I would strongly recommend you take a look at it. And I wanted to switch gears a little bit on networking, because I'm just going to say it is safe to say you are the networking king. But back in the day, for you, social media wasn't really a thing. Like you probably had MySpace, right? Like that was probably the big
Barely, yeah. And I didn't even know what
barely,
was. Yeah.
And so now that social media is so much more important and integrated in our lives versus like when you worked with your dad, like how has networking changed for you?
Yeah, I'm telling you, social media completely changed the game, because now all of a sudden your reach is so much bigger. But you also have to do, I think what's happened is we think, well, if I just do it on social media, it'll work. It doesn't. Now, if you go do the traditional networking and you understand that they're going to go look at your social media, that's where it's very impactful. So if you still show up at those events or those places where the people you're trying to network with are, and then they're going to look you up. And so now if you have a good social media presence, that's where the social media presence plays big, is because now they're looking at your social media and they're seeing your content that you're creating there. I think too many people are just like, well, I'm just going to create a bunch of content and I'm going to sit back and let the social media magic machine do its work. And that's not how it works. You got to get out there and you got to show the universe that you're willing to do the hard stuff of networking, so that the easy stuff with social media, and then you get to a point to where the social media does kind of take over because you've done all of this traditional networking to get your social media to the point to where it can serve you.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I remember I was having a conversation with one of our past guests, Josh Dunn, and we were talking about people in the world of social media management and content creators, if you will. Not like influencers, but the people that are actually putting out the content. And it's fascinating to me how many social media managers I have come in contact with that think what you just said is the way. Like their content that they create in their illustrations, in their art, their masterpiece, because it is an art form, that's going to suddenly sell itself, and that's where they're going to just have this magical influx of money. But then they sit back and they get defeated because they go, well, why am I'm almost like a freelancer, just repeating. I don't have any necessarily business growth. I'm just kind of clawing and scratching. And I've talked to a number of people about this. I'm like, you need to get out there and make it happen. Shake hands, give a hug, kiss babies, and then they come online. I mean, I was the opposite in the fact that I went so long without social media. And then people kept saying, like, it was almost the unwritten rule, like, are you like a psychopath? Like, you don't have a social media? Like, what's the deal? And I'm like, okay, screw it. And then you finally have to jump on board. But, I tell people if my social media presence was gone, it would mean nothing in my professional sense because I've built that with true relationships with people. And that's something people miss these days,
Totally.
you know? Um, there's a quote that I want to reread, and I know it's going to make you smile. Making any decision is better than making no decision at all. So I get where you're coming from on this, but in the world of not necessarily planning, but I'm putting my investment hat on, sometimes the best action is indeed no action at all.
Well, that's your
And
right.
so,
So that's not a bad decision.
yeah. And so to play devil's advocate slightly, because we're saying the same thing to a degree, what moments in your career would you say were times where it would have been best to not take any action? And you could make it the obvious one or the not so obvious.
I'll give you a really poignant one.
Okay.
I'm in prison, and I had been instructed that if you see somebody getting stabbed, don't get in the middle of it. So I'm like, but they're getting stabbed. I mean, I got to stop them. They're like, trust me, do nothing. So about a month later, I'm walking to work, and I worked at the greenhouse. I saw this guy up against the fence just getting stabbed. Boom, boom, boom. And my instincts were, do something. Make the choice, stop this thing from happening. This guy's going to die. And I did nothing. And the reason you do nothing in that moment is that if you don't know what's going on, you don't know, it's probably a gang thing. I'm not affiliated in any gangs. And if I get in the middle of this, now I become a target. So in that instance, I had to do nothing. Even though I wanted to help this person, I had to walk past this guy getting stabbed and do nothing. And that was a really hard thing to do. And I think that applies to, let's say real estate right now. I would say that guys are out there and they're like, I got to be buying real estate. I got to be doing transactions. And right now, the best action to take is nothing. And let me tell you why I say that. Right now, here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing credit card debt at an all-time high. I'm seeing car loan defaults at an all-time high. And I'm seeing interest rates at, some highs. And I'm saying right now, this looks like a very, very dicey market in real estate. And hopefully you've liquidated some things. But right now is a time you don't do any transactions, in my opinion, and you just stay on the sidelines and you be patient and wait. But that's the decision you're making, at least that calculated decision, that you're not going to be participating in this, even though you're in your brain, you're like, but if I'm not doing transactions and I'm not, making any money, but you could go out there and do some transactions, and trust me, the hot potato's coming, and you're going to get stuck holding this hot potato because, in my opinion, it's coming sooner than you think.
Yeah. Well, it's the classic fear of missing out. I mean, there's so many instances of FOMO, whether it's the stock market, whether it's real estate, whether it's, even private credit is really hot right now. But it's one of those things where, like I tell people all the time, there's a huge difference between investing in what is hot and investing in what you actually understand. And when you ask someone, what do you actually understand about this real estate holding or stock or whatever the case is, most of the time, they go, because I read it somewhere, or some influencer said that they bought it, or my friend bought it. And I'm like, good Lord. So this is going to be a weird question for you. And I know our time is coming down to a close here. And so I want to be respectful of your time because I know you've got a lot of things on your plate, not to mention moving. And so for our listeners that are entrepreneurial, so you talk about mastermind groups a lot and the success you've had implementing them. And I wanted to actually have, there's not really a conversation around it, but I wanted to have a conversation around it more than a question, because there isn't a question about it. I've personally not had the best success with these types of mastermind groups. So, like, what has made it so great for you? Because a lot of times I'll be in these things going, it just kind of sounds like everyone wants to stroke each other's ego, and you're giving opinions, but it's not necessarily genuine. It's, I want to give this opinion to make myself look smart. So, like, what's been your take on them and your success?
What was the guy you said you had on that's like this amazing investment guru? What's his name?
The investment guru. Well, I've had a couple, but Guy Spear was the one I mentioned earlier.
So,
yeah.
Do you think Guy Spear would be an amazing resource for you if you had him kind of like where you could chat with him once a quarter? And I don't know what your relationship is with him. So there's a difference.
I mean, sure.
There's a difference between the masterminds that you just kind of sign up for and they're not very intentional. And then there's the real masterminds that are intentional, which means I'm going to list out certain guys that I know I can develop a relationship with, and they're not going to just blow me off. And I'm going to look for ways where I could add value to them, but I'm also going to look for ways where they can add value to me. And most of these guys that are successful had guys that helped them. So I'm intentional about the guys who I call and I just say, hey, I don't expect you to show up at any meetings, but I want like an open door once a quarter where you and I can chat for 30 minutes or an hour, and I can just talk to you about what's going on in my life, and I can use you as a resource. I also want to be resourceful to you and your time, and so if there's anything I can do for you, and oftentimes I'll find things where I know I can add value to what they got going on, and I'm not asking them to show up to these things where everybody's stroking everybody. I'm creating my own independent mastermind group where I'm like, hey, I know this is important. I need a mentor, and I know you can help me make better decisions in this regard. Are you cool just kind of being, we talk 4 times a year and just kind of check in. And as I have certain things that pop up or arise, I want to be able to text you or just reach out to you because I know you've been through the fire. I know you've been through these things, and I know you can help me, not make a bad decision or a mistake. And so I would be very intentional about the people that I would put into my mastermind. And then I would not, like these mastermind groups that you can go and join, that's a networking group. That's not a mastermind group.
Yeah. Okay. And that answers my question, because I, as far as getting together with people, I am a huge believer, and my followers are going to just roll their eyes because they've heard this so much, but living the concentrated portfolio lifestyle. So in our industry, as you know, diversification is the end all be all. And I don't agree with that. You look at every major business, every major successful businessman or woman, investor, the one commonality that they have, or one of them, is the fact that they did it with either one or a few investments. Max, Bezos, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, God rest his soul. He had 3 holdings for the last 50 years. He had, this is not investment advice, Berkshire Hathaway, Costco, the Daily Journal, his home, and I guess an apartment. So I guess 5. Okay, whatever. And he was worth like $3 billion. And it's the same mental model that I've taken into meeting with people, where I don't need this huge mastermind group, right? Like what we would call traditional mastermind group. And that, you just put the nail in the coffin for me, in the fact that, those groups, when you have to pay for it, you got to ask yourself, if I'm already having this gut feeling it's not going to work, it's probably not going to work.
Right. Right.
So, okay. All right. I get that. So when I appreciate that free advice on this episode. Now, you have obviously gone through a ton to claw back to where you are today. I mean, 1, you're literally out of prison. Nice. You've stayed out of prison. Double nice. And then 3, you're not broke. Triple nice. So to close out our discussion, tell our listeners what you're up to these days.
So yeah, I ended up selling the business that I was involved in. And right now I am in search of my next opportunity. I'm looking at a variety of different software companies. I've been offered different jobs and positions. I recently got offered a job to be a host of a TV show that's a documentary on mass incarceration in America. So like I've got lots of different options out there. I do spend a ton of time in the good book, in the Bible. And so I spend a lot of my free time there. I've really been working on, since I have this freedom right now, just getting in shape so I can look as good as you, Chris.
I don't know about that. That's a pretty low bar, my friend, but thank you.
But I'm also, my intention is to get into politics. I'm not super stoked of what I'm seeing out there right now. And I'm not a complainer. Like if I don't like something, I'm not going to complain about it. I'm going to do something about it. And I feel like because of my experience and what I've been through, I would like to get into some thing in politics. I have my eyes set on a certain spot. And so, I've hired a political coach to teach me everything I can learn about politics, because there are things on the Republican side that I agree with and things I disagree with, and things on the Democratic side that I agree with and disagree with. And I'm trying to formulate my own opinions because I believe America is the promised land. I believe America is an incredible place to live. And I feel like we're losing some of that. And what I'm seeing, especially with guys like me that are super, have been super successful, or maybe they're super rich, they're just like, yeah, I don't care. I'm going to stay out of it. And these are the guys that we need. These are the leaders that we need that are choosing just to stay out of it because they're so disenfranchised with it. And so I'm hoping I can bring these leaders. I look at our political landscape right now and I say to myself, I wouldn't hire these people to run my business ever. Like, these guys just don't seem like the sharpest tools in the shed. And unfortunately, the sharpest tools in the shed, they're out building businesses. They're out making money. They're out, moving and shaking. They're not getting into politics. So that's on my radar, but I'm just trying to look for my next move and be smart about it. I've been on a social media fast. So during this time period, I started November 1st, and I'm going to be on my fast until the end of December, where I'm also looking at all the different things in my current social media and what I should do different and what I've done wrong and how I can reach people better. And so I actually love what you're doing on your social media. Like, you're actually providing some real education. I watch your videos and it's really good stuff. And I like that you go against like just like you just did with diversification. You go against what everybody else is talking about. And I like that perspective, because I view you more as a lion, not as a sheep. So.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, man. I really do. And likewise. Now, where can our capitalizers go to best support, follow, and find you?
Go to my Instagram at Shane Baldwin _ on Instagram. You can find me on YouTube. If you Google me, you can see my mugshot. So I'm not too hard to find. And I respond to every DM. If I get a DM, I respond within 24 hours. I don't go to sleep having not responded to every text message and every DM. I'm not as good on the email side of the equation. I get so many of those emails. But DMs and texts, like, I'm money. So if I can serve you, help you in any way, if I've had people that have called my book, The Modern Day Think and Grow Rich, and they'll reach out to me like, hey, can I do a call? I got a question. I'm like, yeah, I'm totally down. Like, I'm up at 5:33 in the morning and I go to bed at 10:33 at night. So like, I got plenty of time during my day to get things done and to help people out.
Awesome, Shane. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And to those of you that are listening in, as always, thank you for tuning in to Capitalize Your Finances. To the veterans out there, you already know the drill. But to the newbies, first off, welcome to the Capitalize community. And if you have any questions about today's episode, you can either shoot me an email, chris@capitalizeyourfinances.com, or give me a call at 253-214 3050. That's 253-214-3050. If you're watching this and going, hey, this is a pretty cool show, I would like to hop aboard, head on over to capitalizepodcast.com. Shoot my team and myself a DM. We look at it every single day. As always, I'm your host, Christopher Paniotti, the Cap and Capitalize. And until next time, keep capitalizing.
You should always seek counsel of the appropriate advisor prior to making any investment decision. All investments are subject to risk, including the loss of principal. Christopher Paniotti is a registered representative with and securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, and member FINRA SIPC. The investment professionals are affiliated with LPL Financial and are conducting business using the name Capitalize Your Finances, a separate entity from LPL Financial. Shane Baldwin and any other individual or company mentioned in this podcast are not affiliated with Capitalize Your Finances or LPL Financial.